My name is Dawn Olson. I'm a registered clinical counselor and a professional art therapist. And in regard to the videos that I'm making for this series, I'll tell you about my experience that relates to the video series. I am currently working in an inpatient psychiatric hospital serving teens ages about 13 through 18 and also children ages 6 to 12. So this particular video is based on a Mandala intervention that I designed for groups doing art therapy in an inpatient psychiatric hospital, and this particular intervention is for teens. And the teens I've served with this intervention are generally about ages maybe 13 through 17 or so. Treating teens with serious psychiatric illnesses who might also be dealing with behavioral issues is notoriously difficult. It is a population known to show a lot of resistance, and we know that teens generally show resistance, but teens with these extra problems can be particularly resistant and difficult to deal with in a therapeutic setting. They can also be very rewarding. So this particular intervention really seems to engage them, and because of its structure and the particular guidance that's offered during the intervention, it really seems to be a gratifying experience for them, and one where they learn a lot about themselves and each other, and where I as a therapist learn a lot from them as well. I think that the best way to learn how to do this intervention, and actually the best way to learn how to do all art therapy interventions, is to do it yourself first. I'd like to invite you to do that. So the next thing I'm going to do is give you a list of supplies, and I'd like you to gather those supplies, bring them back to the table, and then continue watching the video and follow along with me as if you were one of the students in the group or one of the clients in the group. It is kind of a rule that as an art therapist, we have to always test out what we're doing ourselves, because we'll often find that we've made assumptions and that those assumptions show up in an unhelpful way during the art therapy session. A recent example I can think of is actually with an older client where I brought paper it was actually wallpaper paper that I needed her to tear up into the shape of a portrait. And it turns out that the wallpaper was heavily reinforced, so it was completely untearable. So I really do support you or encourage you to work through the intervention with me, or at least listen and then follow it through yourself so you can test it for yourself. And that said, while you're doing it for yourself and maybe pausing the video, I suggest that you really do keep in mind that the whole intervention is an hour long, so not to labor over the parts, but really to try and have the same experience that the clients in your group might be having. So I'll talk next about the supplies that you need. For each teen in your group, you're going to need a sturdy piece of watercolor paper. I generally buy student grade. Budgets aren't high generally for supplies, so student grade watercolor paper is just fine. And I'm going to suggest just getting a bigger size than you might think of, so something that maybe is about 14 by 14 inches square, or if you make a circle about the same diameter. And there's nothing magical about 14 inches. I just want to make sure that you provide them with something that gives them lots of room to work. If you give them something quite small to work with, then it becomes cramped. It becomes less of a loose and gratifying process. And anxiety is more apt to creep in if they're trying to make something that's really small and cramped for them. So a piece of watercolor paper for each of the clients in your group, and one for yourself because you'll be doing some demonstrating throughout the session. You'll also need a selection of 6 to 8 liquid watercolors. You might not know about these. This is an example of a liquid watercolor. It is liquid, as you can see. This one is about a 4-ounce bottle, and I checked prices last night in my locality and at art stores. They are terribly expensive. I think they were 1/2-ounce bottles, so you can imagine I don't think that's much more than a teaspoon. And a set of 8, I think, was $52. But I have a set, or you can get a set of 8-ounce bottles. I think about 8 bottles at 8 ounces each for about $42 off of Amazon. They haven't paid me to say that. It's just an offering for you. That's one place I found them at a reasonable price. So you need to have a selection of maybe 6 to 8 liquid watercolors. Generally in art therapy, we don't put out the black, so you don't need to have a black, or you can put that one aside. You also need some small containers, and I use a plastic container like this, but really anything will do. The advantage of this over a yogurt container, of course, is that you can see through it, so it's easy for them to see what the colors are. And you will need to put these watercolors into the little container. And I'd suggest they're very potent, so you can use maybe about a teaspoon or so and put that in the container. And then you can add some dilution to it, but add just a little bit at a time. Like I'd add maybe a quarter teaspoon, and then test it out, like have a scrap piece of watercolor paper. What you're looking for is you want to stretch your watercolors as much as you can, but at the same time, you really want to keep the vividness that they have, because the vividness is a part of the gratification for the teens. What they will create is a really aesthetically appealing mandala that's gratifying for them, that helps them feel successful. But I found that if you provide really pastel kinds of tones, it just doesn't have the same effect at all. So you want nice, vivid colors that you're offering them. So next you'll need some watercolor brushes. I'm actually not even sure if this is a watercolor brush, but it is certainly the right shape. It will hold a lot of watercolor in its bristles, and it does have a nice point on the end with which they can do a bunch of detail. You can also provide another finer tipped brush that they can kind of use later. They may put in some of the main shapes with the larger brush, and then later they may want to add some fine detail with a small brush. And generally we don't provide too many small brushes for people in art therapy, because again, it leads to being kind of perfectionistic and constrained, and what we're looking for is something that's loose and freeing and fun. We're trying to get people to play with art the way they might have played with it when they were small. Next, you will need to have water containers for cleaning brushes. And I really like using just mason jars. They hold a lot of water, so you don't have to get up and keep cleaning them over and over and over. And they're readily available. So a mason jar is a great thing as a jar for cleaning brushes. You will also want to have a bunch of rags. Cotton rags work best for, I find, they're quite absorbent. Or you can have just squares of paper towel that you set down, one for each of the teens. You'll also need pencils, a pencil sharpener, and a geometric compass. We're doing mandalas, so there will need to be rings, concentric rings drawn on the watercolor paper. I do have erasers available, but I never put the erasers out. If people see erasers, then they will certainly use them. And again, we want them to be uninhibited in their use of the pencil in drawing. But if somebody really wants one, then I will bring out an eraser and provide it to them. So using the compass and an HB or lighter pencil, what you will need to do is inscribe each piece of the watercolor paper, the ones for the teens and the one for you, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 circles, and that will provide you with 1, 2, 3, 4 ring spaces plus a circle in the middle. I've used a darker, a 9B pencil here, I think, to make these marks more pronounced so that you can see them on the video, but do choose a light-colored pencil, like a 4H or a 3H or something, to make the marks for the teens. That will help the mandala basically to look better, for the vivid colors to be what's in the forefront and not these gray rings. So you'll prepare these, and when you're doing them, I really suggest that you make the outside circle as large as possible. So don't use your nice big 14 by 14 inch piece of paper and make a small mandala. We want to keep as much space as we can for the teens to work in. So that is the watercolor paper, and that's your prep basically. As far as setting up the room, what you will need to do is lay out the watercolor papers at the table, the working table where everyone will be sitting. Lay out one per teen plus a pencil for each of them. And also at your own spot, you'll want to have your watercolor paper and a pencil as well. And what I do when I'm working in art therapy is I just put out the materials that they'll immediately be working with, which in this case is the watercolor paper and the pencil. And I put all other supplies on a side table, and I cover them with a cloth or with a large piece of paper. Particularly with young children, they are very enticed, and they will notice everything that's in the room and want to get into those things. And that's not what you want. You want people to come to the table, to sit down, to focus on what's in front of them, and to focus on you. So set everything else aside on a side table. When the session begins, it is a part, I think, that can be overlooked. When the teens come in, I think it's really important that the greeting that they receive is a really warm one, and that basically the message is that you're really glad to see them. I like to state that. I remember I had a student or a teen once who said to me that what they got most out of the therapy was how pleased I seemed to be to see them every time they came, and that was a really healing experience for them. So a warm greeting for your teens. Tell them that once they've sat down that today they'll be making a mandala, and they'll be asking you. They're always they're either very keen to know what's going on, or they're actually very anxious to know what's going on. So you want to get into that right away to let them know what it is they'll be doing. So let them know that they'll be making a mandala. Another piece of prep that you could do if you like is to research a little bit what mandalas are, although I can tell you a bit, and what I will tell you is enough for you to go forward with that. But out of your own interest, you might like to look. So you can sort of briefly define what a mandala is. And a mandala is really just a piece of art that's contained within a circle. So any piece of art that's in a circle can be referred to as a mandala. You could tell them about Buddhist mandalas, that they are beautiful, large, sometimes several feet across or even meters across, sort of paintings, sand paintings made with colored sand, in which they are formed piece by piece, like every grain of sand is sort of set down almost one by one into beautiful designs. And then the whole work is generally swept away at the end once it's completed, as a statement about the impermanence of things, and as a statement about not being attached, a statement about non-attachment. And the teens really like to learn a little bit. I really recommend kind of having just a little bit of a teaching piece at the beginning. They want to learn. They're like the rest of us do. We always appreciate learning something. So you can talk to them about that. You can also tell them that the circle itself is a symbol of wholeness and completeness. And I've certainly found that that the populations I've worked with, wherever we're introducing a circle, always does seem to evoke a sense of wholeness and completeness. There's something very satisfying and restful about the shape of the circle. So next, you can explain to your teens that what you'll be offering is a guided activity. You'll be introducing them to a different theme for each ring in the mandala, and they'll be responding to the theme that you offer with a very simple drawing that they produce in repeat around the ring. Tell them that you'll be inviting them to represent their art in a way that maintains the level of privacy they want. So all of this is about establishing emotional safety in the group. So let them know that you have ways of helping them to find images for their symbol, or encouraging them to find images for themselves that represent something that's personal to them in a way that protects their privacy. So in the first ring, for example, they'll be drawing something about something in nature that they've really enjoyed. And you'll be encouraging them to find a symbol for that thing that they've really enjoyed. So for instance, if that thing is whales, and let's say they didn't want to let the group know that, in fact, they really enjoyed whales, unlikely, but if that were the thing they wanted to keep private, they could just draw some spouting water. So an example of that would be just kind of making an image like this and then repeating it around the outside ring. And for them, they know that that represents whales, but nobody else needs to know that if that's a thing that they'd like to keep to themselves. When you do the demos, and you'll be doing making other little examples for them, because it's very helpful to them. And the helpful thing about it is showing the simple way in which they can represent their ideas, and also showing them how quickly you're drawing, that you're not being precious about it or trying to make it perfect or exact. And you're also modeling just how quickly to work through it, because if you don't do that, then people will labor over it, and it'll take longer than you have. And it's kind of not in the spirit of what you're doing, which is art therapy, not an art class. So this low anxiety and simplified approach will be very reassuring to the teens. You will notice as soon as you introduce the idea that they'll be drawing something that physical tension starts to occur. There'll be a few people in the group who get quite scared about the possibility of having to draw. And they'll voice that often, I can't draw. And they're worried about being able to draw realistically. So when they do raise that concern, you can take that as an opportunity to do a little demonstration. You might even ask them, well, what kind of thing might you like to draw? And then find a way to draw that in a really simple way. And it just, you'll see even physically in their bodies, the anxiety will be greatly diminished. So the next step is for them to begin the drawing portion of the mandala. I separate it into two parts. First of all, we do the drawing of the mandala with a pencil. And then once we've completed all the drawings, then we go back and add the paint. So the first step, and it's a funny thing that I've done, but I had a hunch about it. I just asked them to make a little dot in each corner of the paper. And I've actually ever had one person who's asked me why we put that dot in. They sort of asked at the end of the mandala making. And my answer is just to get you started, just to make a mark on the page. We don't do anything with it. Although actually maybe somebody did once go make a flower or something like that with a dot, but it's really just getting them engaged with the paper. There's something about the blank page that is intimidating for everybody, including for professional artists. The next step is actually to launch into introducing the outside ring directive. In this mandala making, we do work from the outside, and typically in all mandala making that's structured like this, you do work from the outside ring toward the center. So let them know that you'll be going through the rings one by one. They'll be finding a symbol or some sort of representation for the theme that you've introduced, and they'll just repeat it around the ring. And let them know that when you see 2 or 3 people in the group are finished, that you'll be introducing the next ring, but not to worry if you're not finished with yours, that you will restate so that others can catch up. You'll restate what the previous ring was, and so they can ask as much as they need for reminders about what each ring is. People do work at different speeds, and you can make a statement about that. That's also reassuring for them to know that you're accepting of people that work at different speeds. And you'll have, I'll offer you later some activities for early finishers so that basically most people can keep working throughout the entire session. So I mentioned the outside ring. The outside ring is going to be drawing something from the natural environment that you enjoyed in the past, or maybe something that you love now. It could be anything. It could be mud puddles. Maybe you loved mud puddles when you were a kid, and that's immediately what comes to mind. Or maybe you like making mud pies. Maybe you liked, and maybe you still like jumping in puddles. So people say, well, I can't draw myself jumping in a puddle. Well, you could just put 2 boots and put some marks around it to indicate jumping in. Maybe you put a little puddle ring around it and repeat this around. Or maybe you love the rain, and so maybe what you do is you just put 3 drops, and maybe you just keep working your way. That's what you love out of the natural environment. Or maybe it's birds, and you can even just doing these marks is all you need to do. So when I'm making them this simple, I'm really talking to the people in the group who are quite nervous about drawing or who really criticize themselves about it. But actually, when you do it in repeat all the way around and then paint it with the vivid colors, it becomes a beautiful work as well. So it doesn't need to be complicated to be successful or beautiful. So that is the outside ring. So you want everybody to work away at that. You may have one person or 2 people who look like they really are having a hard time getting started. Go over to them and see if you can help them to come up with an image that's a simplified version of what they're thinking of. Sometimes participants will say that I can't think of anything, and in that case, you can ask them to imagine if they did love something, what might that thing be, or what would they like to be able to love in nature that they can't, and then they can represent that symbol around, or they can think about somebody that they are close to, and what does that person love in nature? Do you know something that they really love? So even that provides an emotional connection. If it's somebody that they love and they love something, then it can be a meaningful thing for the person who's making it. So the next ring, you've noticed that a few people out of the group are, let's say, I think I'd want maybe about 4 people out of a group of 8 to be finished before I introduce the next thing. You can go on to the next ring. Again, reassure people, if you're not, don't worry, just continue with doing the outside ring if that's where you're at. I'll repeat ring number 4 for you in a few minutes. So this next ring is about thinking of an animal that you've felt connected with, or one that you've always liked. Maybe it's something from the past. It could be a pet you had, or it could just be an animal that you really admire or have fun with. And think about how you might really simply represent this animal on the paper. And I had one person in a group who said, I love monkeys so much. And she just drew kind of a circular monkey tail. That's how she represented it all the way around. Or if you love cats, you can just do lines to represent whiskers, for instance, or make it a little more elaborate and do kind of a kitty mouth and whiskers. Or maybe you make a kitty head with ears and just repeat that all the way around. One of the lovely things about this particular activity aesthetically is that just repeated symbols, repeated images are gratifying to look at. There's something about repetition that pleases the eye. So that's one of the things I really appreciate about this intervention, is that in so many ways it guarantees success for the team. So that is ring number 4. When a number of people have finished that particular ring, what you can do next is ring number 3. So let them know that some people seem to be finished that particular ring number 4, and it's time to move on to ring number 3 for those who are ready. So I think this might be one of the most meaningful rings. I want them to think of somebody who's encouraged them, even if only in the smallest way. It can be easy for teens to, when you offer something like, think of somebody who's encouraged you, to immediately think, well, nobody's ever encouraged me. There can be all or nothing thinking or just really negative thinking. So you want to add, even if only in the smallest way. And then again, if somebody says, nobody has ever encouraged me, which is probably unlikely, they're in a setting where people are probably encouraging and helping them all the time, you can think of strategies like asking them, is there anybody in this group who's said something kind to you? Or has anybody here done anything that was helpful, even in the smallest way? And give an example. Maybe somebody complimented you and noticed that you'd changed your hair, or so it can be something really, really small. And again, if they really stick with, I can't think of anybody who's encouraged me ever, how would you like to be encouraged? Or what's an encouraging thing that you've done for someone? So they're representing something positive for themselves in that particular ring. And I don't usually have that level of resistance, but it is actually good to know what to do if somebody says, I've never been encouraged before. And another one you can do is actually, well, how have you encouraged yourself? That would be another good thing to do. Can you think of a way that you've encouraged yourself? And how could you represent that? An example that I give is I had a teacher in grade 4, Mrs. Page, who was lovely to me and who walked by one day and really liked my haiku. So I could represent a haiku which has a short line, a long line, and a short line. In that way, if I wanted to keep that private or just really simple, because I felt, it seems like a difficult thing to do to actually write a haiku around your ring. So you could just repeat those sets of lines all the way around. So that is ring number, that was ring number 3. So we're going to be moving on to ring number 2. Ring number 2 is to think of a time when you felt free, even if only for a moment. And again, I'm adding even if only for a moment, because sometimes people actually haven't felt free. I had one young woman who I actually quite believed. She said, I've never felt free in my life. But you're helping them to look for small moments if they haven't had big moments. And with the population that I work with in a psychiatric hospital, these are actually a concentrated group of children and teens who come from a wide geographic area, and they've had some of the very hardest lives. So sometimes it may be the case that they actually can't remember a moment when they felt free or felt good because they've had horrible experiences and they've suffered. So I give a personal example. One of the moments that I felt most free is actually riding my bike down a hill with the wind going against me, and actually just the feeling of the wind on my face is a feeling that gives me a sense of freedom. But in terms of riding my bike, there are different ways I could represent that. I could just make a very simple bike, and with or without spokes, and repeat that image all the way around. Or if I said I really like the feeling of the wind, I could just represent it with a spiral too. That could be the wind blowing. So there are different ways that you can do that. And And again, I'm doing these very quickly in order that I'm modeling to the kids a really sort of quick and easy approach and a non-perfectionist kind of approach to making the symbols. When most of that group is done, and by now you will probably have repeated some of the instructions for the various rings, when all of those rings are done, the next thing that you do, and the last place to draw on the mandala, is in the innermost circle. So in that circle, I invite the teens to think of a healthy wish or goal that they have for themselves and think about how they could represent that in a symbol. And I have to stress that you have to say, think of a healthy wish or goal, or you'll have things like crack pipes, depending on your population, but I might get things like that from my group. So think of a healthy wish or goal that you could represent in some sort of symbol. So for example, if you want to learn how to dance, I think one young person I had did sort of a very simple ballet shoe that could look like, just doesn't have to be too real, with maybe some long ribbons coming down. That could be a ballet shoe. Or if they want to learn how to dance, just musical notes could be something that you put there. Maybe somebody says, my goal is to graduate high school. Maybe they've been struggling to do that for a long time. And so maybe they would make a mortar board, just a really simple mortar board. And again, your role would be to help some of the teens maybe who are struggling to think of a symbol that could represent the thing for them. And sometimes if people really can't think of an image and they maybe don't like the ones that you're offering, you can ask them to choose a color that represents the feeling of that thing for them. And maybe if they love the ocean, they love the undulating waves, but they're not satisfied with drawing it, just have them maybe take a color that represents the ocean, probably blue for them, and make a wavy line if that's how the ocean feels for them. So that's a good thing to do, is if they can't think of a symbol, don't want to draw something, just put in some color or make a line shape that feels like that thing feels for you. And I give lots of examples when I'm talking with the kids about personal goals or wishes, and I try to make them quite varied. So somebody's wish might be to go to New York, or to graduate, to get a cat. It could be to learn how to knit a pair of socks, to get married. Kids, those are kinds of things that kids might talk about. And they might be very small things. I've always wanted to learn to make to decorate a cake in a really fancy way. All those things. So give a wide range of things from what seemingly kind of on the small scale all the way to big hopes and goals and dreams. The next stage of the process is the painting of the mandalas. As they begin to finish their drawings, you can start bringing out all the other supplies that you had on the side table. So the watercolors, the paint brushes, the water containers, rags or paper towels, lay them all out. And I try to lay them out so that everybody has physical access to everything, but also I put them in containers and I lay them out in a manner that makes them look quite inviting, kind of creating an art supply buffet down the middle of the table. You'll need to probably interrupt the teens for a minute to demonstrate, the ones who aren't finished anyway, you'll need to interrupt them to demonstrate how they can use just watercolors or watercolors and crayon resist to color their mandala. So if they have a crayon, they can sort of outline a shape if they like and then paint within that shape, and the watercolor won't creep out beyond the confines of the crayon. So that's something that you could show them. And another thing that's important that you'll want to show them is that when you do have two different watercolor colors that you're using and you're painting them side by side, if you don't want them to bleed into one another, then you are going to need to leave a small space between. And this is important to say because some kids will get disappointed if they're painting two colors and one immediately sucks into the other and kind of changes the look of the thing for them. So if they're painting, I'll show you, I've got these two little circles here. If they are painting this one green, and they want the next one to be near it to be yellow, then they are going to have to leave a small space in between the two, or one will immediately suck into the other. And I'll show you how that happens on this one here, where I'll actually put them a bit too close. And sometimes it makes lovely results, but some kids are really disappointed when colors kind of start to bleed into one another. So that's starting to happen here. This green is starting, maybe you can't quite see it, but it's starting to creep into the other one. it's making a bit of a liar out of me, but trust me, you need to keep a small space in between in order to prevent those colors from bleeding one into the other. So, also show them that they do need to rinse their brushes, otherwise they are going to end up with very muddied watercolor colors, especially if they're dipping back into the yellow again. That color very easily becomes polluted and starts changing to something that's less vibrant and not very satisfying for them. So you can show them how to do that, just basically rinsing out their brush in the water and then drying it on a cloth or on the paper towel and then dipping into the new color that they want. I think that's all the prep that you need to give them for their watercolor use. So the next part I want to tell you about dealing with early finishers. There are always people who will finish early, and so you need to have some ideas for things that they can do to keep themselves busy while the rest of the group catches up. So one thing that I have done that has been quite successful is to have them look at each ring and to think of one word that kind of that either that they associate with that ring or that's kind of the essence of that ring for them. So if on the outside ring they had done ocean, and the word that sums it up for them is immense. That's one of the things that appeals to them about the ocean, is its immensity. Maybe the next ring they put a cat, and maybe it's playful. So the two words they get there are immense, playful. Have them make a list of those words, and you can either provide them with a piece of paper. Often they just write them down on the side of beside the mandala. Have them make a list of those words, and then invite them to make a quick poem or a sentence or a couple of sentences using those words. And sometimes that is one of the really rewarding parts of the session, is at the end, after everybody is shown, or while they're showing their mandala, they read out the little poem. And they have a great sense of humor, and it really engages everybody and adds depth, actually, to the mandala as well, when they've chosen words that mean something to them from something that means something to them, and then brought it to another level of going from the sort of this creative process to a cognitive process. I think it really deepens the experience and enhances the meaning of the whole mandala making process. On the other hand, they may not want to do that. Children and teens in this population are often compromised in their ability to be motivated, to have focus. They may be changing medications, or a medication has not quite taken effect, and their concentration is not good, their motivation is not good. It's hard for them to sustain concentration, so they might be tired. For those, you can just invite them maybe to turn over their mandala and just freely paint on it, and they can find that really satisfying. Or maybe they just need to sit quietly and rest too, so that's always an option. As far as processing the mandalas, what you'll want to do is let the group know that they are going to be now sharing about the paintings, if they want to, and to whatever degree that they want to. It's fine for them to pass. That's part of establishing emotional safety too, is always really giving permission to the participants to pass. And it's important to say that, not just kind of know it and not say it, because it's can be humiliating or embarrassing for them if you haven't actually stated that it's okay to pass, and then they do pass. Choosing a good sharer to start is a good strategy. Don't choose the same one every time. I think that puts an unfair burden on that person, but see if you can find somebody in the group who appears to have been quite engaged, maybe has had some fun with it, obviously, some obvious fun with it, and choose them to start. They will get the ball rolling and help model the kind of approach that you want to this stage of the process. If somebody seems to want to share but they're not forthcoming, you can offer various prompts, and I'll give you a little list of those. Another option is actually to write out some of these prompts and leaving space between them on a piece of paper, and provide copies to everybody, and people who, if you have time at the end, or people who have finished early, can use those to kind of journal in a way about their mandala. So I mean, just a good general question, and open-ended questions are great because it allows people to go where they want to go with their thoughts. So how was that for you? How was the mandala making process? How was the session for you? What part of either the process or of your mandala did you like the most? What part maybe didn't you like so much? Was there a part that was challenging for you? You can also invite each teen to find a title for their mandala and actually to put the title and their name and maybe the date on the front. Adding a title to their work is often revealing about what the mandala means to them. And again, it takes it to, it adds something in terms of adding depth and meaning to what they've just created. I'm thinking about one young woman who looked at, I think, at her mandala and kind of got the general flavor of it. And she said, "Oh my gosh, it's me and my anxiety." And then that's what she called it. And it was kind of a revelation to her to see her anxiety represented in her art. As a final question, if you have time again, you've done all the go around, people have shared and shown their art a little bit. You can ask them, what are you taking away today? It's a great question that I use both in my counseling and in my art therapy, but what are you taking away today? Just in a word or in a sentence, what are you taking away? And it gives a chance for everybody to do a kind of a quick checkout. If the group is impatient, which I'm assuming that they are because we're talking about a hospital population, they can take their mandalas back to the ward, and if they're not finished, they can finish it there as long as they have permission from the staff to do that. They can also post it on the wall in their room, and it becomes a really great resource for them. Remember that these are young people who are struggling to feel good about themselves, to remember the resources that they do have around them and within themselves. And it can be a lovely kind of touchstone and a resource, a grounding kind of resource for them to have it posted in their room. It's also something they can take when they meet with their psychiatrist to kind of share what they've done and share their pride in what they've made, and also share some of the information and learning that came out of the mandala for them. Finally, I wanted to talk about why this intervention seems to work so well. There are lots of reasons, and I'm going to talk about some of those. One of them that stands out for me is that teens are really developmentally driven to begin exploring who they are, and this intervention is clearly very much based on their identity. All the responses are about them, about their history, about their future goals. And so it really does provide a mechanism for them to really look at aspects of themselves. And they find this very gratifying. They're really driven to explore who they are. And they keep changing who they are too, so it's a useful exercise at any time for them. Another reason I think this intervention works really well is that the skill demand on the teen is low. It doesn't further tax their already low energy and their anxious, often depressed state. So it doesn't ask a lot of them, and it provides a lot of reassurance and examples of how to do things simply. The exercise is very structured and guided by the therapist, by you, creating a sense of security that allows them to relax. So as you are well aware, as most people are aware, teens really rebel against structure and against being told what to do, but they do at the same time need structure and guidance, and I think this intervention provides some of that, but at the same time, within the structure is also freedom is given for them to respond in within certain guidelines, within whatever way that they want to, and with symbols and images that mean something to them. So it provides a structure for them that they can relax in and where they can have freedom to explore their creativity and themselves. Another reason I think it's successful is because, as I've mentioned many times, it's quite aesthetically rewarding, relying on the repetition of form and also providing this vivid color that can be so gratifying and appealing. And both of those things and the things before them are also contributing to a sense of pride in their accomplishment. The task of coming up with a symbol to represent something personal, I think, disrupts their automatic habit of undermining the experience of positive emotion by reverting to negative and anxious thinking. So, for example, if I said to them, or if they told me that Aunt Tilda was their encourager, this exercise requires them to find a symbol for her or for the form of her encouragement. But if the task instead was to represent Aunt Tilda, then I think there are barriers that are immediately thrown up, including sometimes within the teen themselves. They might immediately start thinking, well, Aunt Tilda, yes, but she has been encouraging, but what about the time she forgot my birthday? But this task immediately gets you thinking about just a small, simple way to represent Aunt Tilda. instead of thinking about her more globally and leaving room for the teen to start some negative thinking or yes-butting. I also like that the task provides some cognitive challenge for the teen, but not too much. It seems to have the right level of cognitive complexity. It intrigues and motivates them, but doesn't overwhelm them. The Mandala questions are intentionally framed to recall and to help re-experience positive emotion. And I've said before, and you all know that that can be in really short supply and for them. And part of their recovery is about learning to create positive emotion and to deliberately create experiences that provide positive emotion. And in that regard, the whole task of engaging with creativity is teaching them a resource that they can use that provides that kind of positive emotion. Another reason I think that this particular intervention is particularly successful is that it does set the stage for a lot of safe personal sharing. The first time I did it, I was amazed by what I had learned about in the go-round, by what I learned from each participant about who they were, their past experiences, their thoughts and feelings. It was quite remarkable to me. So it does provide a mechanism for learning about yourself, learning about one another, and for the therapist also to gain a deeper understanding of each person in the group. And as I mentioned before, as a completed artifact, the Mandala itself can be used as a personal resource, which they rely on in the hospital for their recovery, but also one that they take with them that should have durability through time in terms of its meaningfulness for them.